Good afternoon. I am Joy Calloway. I'm your trainer for today, and welcome to Optimizing Employee Retention Through Effective Onboarding. I'm excited you all chose this class today. Clearly, as HR professionals, you know the connection between effective onboarding and employee retention. So before we get started, and we don't have a lot of time together today, I am going to quickly take you through our roadmap of how we're going to get through the material today. The very first thing I want us to do is talk about what onboarding is and what it is not. We'll talk about why a strategic and effective onboarding program is important in the workplace. We'll consider 6 elements of an effective onboarding process. I'm going to give you a little quiz, so warning, you will have a little quiz. Talk about some next steps in your organization, and finally close with a Q&A. So before we get started, I first want to ask those of you all in the room, how many of your organizations have a formal onboarding process?
Well, we have an onboarding process. Well, we have an onboarding training, I should say.
Okay.
I don't know, when you say process, what do you mean?
We're actually going to get to that. You yourself have to question if it's a process or if it's a training. Does it feel like an event or does it feel like a process?
It's probably more of an event.
Okay.
And they go through a 2 weeks training program, and where they learn about the policies and the procedures, what our expectations, they learn about our company's culture, and then we kind of take them through their jobs and all things they need to know so that we can get them started on the right foot.
Okay.
And then we put them out in the field next to some other employees and let them kind of learn from the other employees on the job experience.
Sure.
And then we kind of put them on their own.
Okay, thank you for that. It sounds like some of the elements are there, but let's get started and see how many we can check off. So the first thing I want us to do is to align ourselves around a common definition. And first I should say that there are 3 very important HR experiences for new hires. You have, as you mentioned, a training program. The training program is really about the job itself. You understand the roles, the responsibilities, the expectations, and the technical nature of the job. There is also an orientation process, and the orientation process is really about compliance. It's rules and regulations that apply to the organization, the industry, and potentially somewhat of the job. Onboarding is a process. It's not an event, and we'll talk about what it really means. The 4 points here: immersion, culture, transition, and loyalty. An onboarding process is about immersing a new employee in the culture of an organization to transition them in and into becoming a valued and loyal employee. So let's take all of these pieces separately. What does immersion mean? Anybody? Remember immersion?
It means to drench, to put under, to
Exactly.
submerge.
Exactly. Think about those terms. We usually think about water, immersing in water. Think about immersing an employee in your workforce. That is complete involvement and engagement of the employees, surrounding them with your organization in every possible way. Thank you. Very good answer. Culture of an organization is critically important. We know that, what do they say, culture eats strategy for lunch? We know that culture is important because a new hire, any employee, has to understand what we do in this organization and what we don't do, what we can say and what we can't say. A new employee has to understand the mores and the norms of a particular organization and the best way to be successful in an organization. So culture is critically important. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. The transition piece, we want to create someone who is no longer an outsider to our organization, but an insider. And we want that transition to be as seamless as possible so that when they come into the organization, they're fully immersed in learning the culture. They're transitioning. It's almost like they're shedding that non-employee life and coming into full life as an employee of our organization. Finally, the goal of a successful onboarding process is to create loyalty. We want an employee who wants to stay with our organization for the long haul. And what we do know is that a loyal employee creates loyal customers, clients, and consumers. Let's talk now about why onboarding is important. The first key, and I gave you a hint, is to understand that an employee who has been effectively, successfully onboarded will stay with an organization much longer than one who has not. How many people have organizations where you get somebody in, you spend sometimes upwards of $5,000 to bring a new employee into an organization, and they're gone in 3 or 6 months? Has anybody experienced that?
Yeah, that's happened. Absolutely.
That's because I would surmise there was not an effective and strategic onboarding process offered to them. A couple statistics to share with you. The first, a Harris poll, talks about the 2 top concerns of both HR managers and directors and employees. That is filling positions, and we just talked about how much that can cost, and that is keeping employees in position once they get them there. One of my favorite studies, the Stein Christian study, my third. A full 1/3 of new hires are gone within 2 years of joining an organization. The second third, nearly 1/3, is looking for a new job within 6 months of coming on board of their organization, and fewer than 1/3 of the executives that were polled in this study feel positive about their organization's onboarding experience. That last study, the Windhurst Career Builder, says that if an employee is effectively onboarded, they are 58% more likely to stay with their organization or to be there after 3 years' time. This is why an effective and strategic onboarding process is so important. At the end of the day, yes, it's about loyalty, but it's about retention, and retention is about dollars. So let's spend a few minutes talking about the 6 elements of an effective onboarding process. And sir, we'll get to find out if your organization does any of these things. The first thing I want to remind you is that onboarding is a process. It's not an event, something to check off a box. The first thing I want to talk about, as a new hire coming into your organization, I should feel that onboarding is so important to you that you have created a formal, structured learning experience. It's not a class and it's not an event. By formal and structured, I mean that there is a curriculum, an expectation of what new hires are going to learn, how they're going to learn it, who's going to help them learn it. A structured program also has periodic check-ins to make sure that the goals and objectives of the learning experience are being met, and that there is an opportunity for the employee to provide feedback on their experience thus far and the organization. One suggestion or example, the Comcast organization that I've learned firsthand, in their onboarding experience, they have the system set up to ask that new hire on a periodic basis. It starts early, 1 week, 2 weeks, then it goes out to a month, 3 and longer, how their onboarding experience is. What have they learned about the organization that they need to know more about? What have they learned about themselves that perhaps a coach or mentor, which we'll talk about shortly, can help them with? So they stay connected to their new hires for a period of time. That's formal and it's structured. The second critical element is that an effective strategic onboarding process is appropriately timed. Now, there are a few schools of thought about how long an onboarding process should take. Some say as short as 2 weeks, some go as long as 6 months. I think the sweet spot is somewhere in between. I say that an onboarding process should at least be as long as our company's probationary period, which usually in most organizations is about 90 days. The key is you want it to be long enough so that new hires feel that they are being appropriately immersed and acculturated to the organization, but not so long that the people that are part of that onboarding experience get burned out. I believe the sweet spot is right about the 4 or 5 month mark of an appropriately timed process. The third element is stakeholder engagement and awareness. I think it's important for new hires to see that people are engaged and involved in their experience. That helps to lead toward loyalty. There's a study that shows that organizations that have their senior most leaders as a part in some way of new hire onboarding have a greater sense of loyalty amongst new hires. They feel like if the top people in this organization care about my success, they care about how well I'm learning this organization, then I must be important to them, and that breeds loyalty. I like to talk with organizations about having senior level people, lateral folks, and subordinates all part of a new hire's onboarding process. That gives the new hire an opportunity to hear 3 different levels of input into their process. It helps them see the organization from different vantage points, and they have an opportunity to get feedback from people senior to them, lateral, and under them in the organizational chart. The other key with this point is awareness. New hires and employees across the board need to be aware of the end user, client, customer, consumer, whatever it is that you call them in your organization. A new hire has to be aware of what their needs are, what their desires are, what they think about the organization, and how to improve the organization's image in the eye of the final user. The 4th critical element in onboarding is coaching and mentoring. Organizations should have more senior professionals in the organization offering service and support to the new hire. I recommend that organizations assign a coach and a mentor, someone who is well regarded in the organization, is a successful member of the organizational family, and who really has an interest in coaching and mentoring, not just someone who likes to do it, but someone who's good at it and really has good result. That coach and mentor. Yes, you have a question, sir?
So the coaching and mentoring piece, is that structured, or is it just, am I coaching when I identify blind spots, or is it a weekly thing where I'm coaching? Is it an informal meeting that I'm having with the employee? How does that work within the system here?
Sure. My recommendation is there is a formal partnership. So I, as the organization, I'm in HR perhaps, and I link you up as a new employee with a coach and mentor, someone more seasoned, who's well regarded in the organization. They may or may not be in your same job class, but someone who has an identified skill, a proven skill in coaching and mentoring. We recommend that early on in your tenure, you're meeting with that coach or mentor once a week, perhaps twice a week very early on, and over the course of our process, which may be about 4 months, it kind of goes a little bit more infrequently over time. The key is that the relationship is being built there, and that the new hire and the coach can help determine with one another how often they need to engage. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Very good, thank you. The coach and mentor is really responsible for helping that new hire get acculturated to the organization. Again, helping them understand the mores and the norms of the organization. One quick, somewhat humorous example. There's an organization that decided we do not pop popcorn here because if you have popcorn that gets burnt, you smell it all over the place. There was a new hire that came in and she didn't know the rules. Popcorn's a nice snack at 2 in the afternoon, so she pops it in, and of course her first time, she burned the popcorn. It smelled up the entire building, and those that knew the rule looked at her as if she was the problem, because how could she not know this rule? Surely there's not anything in a rule book anywhere or an employee handbook that talks about not popping popcorn. There's nothing posted on the wall in the break room. But perhaps if she had had an organizational coach or mentor, they might have told her one of these unwritten rules that if you want to eat popcorn here, you have to pop it somewhere else and bring it ready-made. The last piece on this coaching and mentoring that I think is critically important, the role of the coach and mentor is also to share what I like to call tribal knowledge. What are the little tricks of the trade, the things that if you know how to do this in this organization would make you more effective and more efficient in getting work done here and be able to advance more quickly if that's so your desire. And so that's another important role of the coach and mentor in the organization. The 5th element of an effective onboarding process is socialization. Everybody wants to belong, and as a new hire in an organization, you do belong to the larger organization. That is true. However, depending on the size of the organization, you might also want to feel a smaller group, a community group, an affinity group, if you will. Many organizations break their new hires into department or role-specific affinity groups. So all of the call center operators get together once a month over coffee and talk about best practices or challenges, or they share stories and generally just feel part of a group. Many organizations now have formalized affinity groups around gender or race and culture, or perhaps even sexual orientation. It's just another way for an organization to say, I see you, I know you want to belong, and we want to formalize that sense of belonging in this meaningful way and support that. The last point, which is a very important one as well, role relevance is key in an effective and strategic onboarding process. That is really understanding what is the importance of my role, how is it relevant to the work that this organization does. Each of us have a specific role in our organizations. It's important for us to understand why that role is important, why it matters that we are there, and why it matters that we do an exceptional job every day. A quick example. If it's my job to put the lug nuts on a vehicle, as I come into an organization, I need to understand what a lug nut is, what its role is on the vehicle. I need to technically know how to do it, and someone needs to tell me why it's important. I'd add, if we're being effective on our onboarding, someone should show me why it's important. Show me a vehicle operating without lug nuts or with loose lug nuts. We'll find out that it's wobbling around, the driver is not able to control the car appropriately, and it impacts their safety. So now I understand, I connect me turning that lug nut to the end user and the safety of our consumer. Another quick example. There's a story of a elementary school janitor who, as you can imagine, is responsible for cleaning the school. He was asked, what is your role here? What do you do? And he could have said, I sweep, I mop, I dust, I do these kind of things. What he said was, I'm responsible for creating an environment that is conducive to learning so that young people can realize their dreams and aspirations for their lives. That's role relevance. As I told you, there would be a quiz. My mother taught school for over 30 years, and she said, a teacher has not taught until the students have learned. So let's check ourselves, shall we? 3 questions. The first, anyone, what is onboarding?
It's a process and an experience as well, learning experience.
Very good. Thank you for that. I'd add, just for the sake of having it, 4 pieces: immersion, culture, transition, and loyalty. Those 4 pieces are important. Why is onboarding important? Anybody have an idea?
Gives the new employee the opportunity to feel part of the organization.
Very good, thank you. I'll amplify that as well if I might. It's, at the end of the day, it's about retention and it's about finances. Organizations that have effective onboarding programs have employees that stay with them longer. So the money that they put in, the investment they put into bringing them on board is an investment that is well spent. And finally, I gave you 6 elements of an effective strategic onboarding process. Tell me one of the 6 and give me an example, please. Anybody?
Appropriately timed.
Okay, say more about that.
Well, I just think it's important that when new hires come on board, they are implemented or inserted, I should say, in a process immediately. You know, there are certain situations where new hires come on board and they don't receive training for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 9 weeks, and because of that, you know, you talked about that story with the lug nuts, right? They're on kind of this wobbly situation.
Sure.
So, yeah, so timing is really important.
Sure. Thank you for that. And also making sure that we just don't throw them out to the wolves. Give them a 2-week experience and then no one's around to help them, to answer their questions, to help them get acculturated to the organization. Thank you. Right before we go to opening the floor for Q&A, I don't believe in offering a training and not hearing how you might use this in your everyday work. I think it's important for you to take information and be able to apply it as soon as your next work day. And so I'm interested in what parts of an effective onboarding process you might be able to take and use in some way in your workplace as soon as Monday. Anyone have any ideas?
Well, I think the coaching piece is something that we really need to work on. Is really spending more time with the employees, you know, listening and learning and observing them, identifying where their needs are and addressing them, and coming up with collaborative solutions in order to make them more well-rounded and confident and competent to do the job.
Wonderful. And so did today give you some tools to go back and have that conversation at your workplace?
Absolutely.
Very good. That was our intention. With that, I'll open the floor to any questions that you may have.
What about a good formal education? Do you have any examples of how to get people started on that right away?
A formal onboarding process and education inside the organization?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, and there are probably a number of materials and support that we can provide for you after this conversation. But on its face, the very first thing is to make sure the new hires understand that my goal for you is that you have a long career here, so that they hear that coming out of your mouth at the very beginning. And then you show them this is the curriculum that we have designed for you and for this role to onboard you into our organization. We have identified a coach and mentor for you who's going to help answer your questions around culture. There's no question that's silly. Please ask him or her whatever it is that you're interested in. And we're going to make sure that you have the opportunity to give us feedback on how this process is going for you. Because again, we want you to complete your full career here at this organization, which is unheard of these days. But there are organizations that manage to keep their employees for a lengthy amount of time because they make them feel valued and they create loyalty. And if you remember, loyal employees mean loyal customers, consumers, and clients. Thank you for that question. Thank you for your time. If you have any other questions, we can do it a little bit after the session. Thank you.